Australian researchers have discovered two new species of a tiny native marsupial that mates so ferociously the entire male population dies off once a year. Those suicidal sex habits make the mouse-like critter prone to extinction, and its tiny habitat is also at risk from logging and feral animals. Scientists are concerned the newly discovered species could disappear before they're listed as threatened, and they're calling for urgent action to save the frisky critters. Elise Worthington reports.
It's a harsh world out there in the animal kingdom, and for the tiny antechinus, it's a short and wild ride. Once a year, the entire male population dies off after a rampant 3-week breeding season driven by huge levels of stress hormones which eventually kill them. Dr. Andrew Baker is a mammalogist from Queensland University of Technology.
They'll bleed to death internally, they'll have ulcers, they'll have really high parasite loads, sometimes they're blind.
And they're still trying to mate when they're very sick.
Absolutely, yeah, they're stumbling around trying to, it's just this absolutely primal urge, and I sort of liken it to Game of Thrones. That's what happens when there's orgies of violence and sex. That's what happens every year.
That leaves the females, often impregnated by multiple partners during the frenzy, to bring up the young on their own. It's a breeding pattern that's challenging scientists who are trying to conserve the unusual species. PhD student Thomas Mutton has been catching and studying the antechinus.
They're going quite hard trying to find mates, and they're beautiful, and also their sex life, I think, is quite interesting to humans. It's certainly a bit different to how we do it.
Researchers are rushing to have two newly discovered species of the native marsupial listed as threatened. Dr. Andrew Baker says he's particularly concerned about one species recently discovered near Port Arthur in Tasmania.
That animal is in only a small area of Tasman Peninsula, and I suspect it's been isolated on Tasman Peninsula for millions of years, and it's just sitting down there in the middle of a state forest that's being logged. So rapidly its habitat's being removed.
Antechinus only live in cool, high and isolated areas of forest spanning less than a few square kilometres. That makes them highly vulnerable to extinction through habitat loss, feral pests and global warming.
The interesting thing is we're finding them, but a high proportion of those that we've found need immediate protection. But it rings alarm bells that it's exciting that we're finding new species, but at the same time, might we lose some of these species almost before we've even discovered them, or almost as soon as we've discovered them?
It's a problem for other species too. Over the past decade, researchers have been in a race to document new marsupials discovered across northern Australia before they disappear. PhD student Thomas Mutton.
There are many, many species at risk of extinction in Australia, and it's really something I think as a society we need to think about more in depth and perhaps focus more on.
PhD student Thomas Mutton ending that report from